Welcome to part 11 of this video time tutorial series. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about fixing the mistakes that I've seen in the final render. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at those mistakes right now before we open up the file. I'm going to go over to the video sequencer and I'm going to scrub the timeline. So mistake number one is sliding textures on gears. Alright, what's causing that is the fact that all these gears are referencing this gear as the UV coordinates. So when that gear rotates, the UVs rotate on all the gears. So definitely a mistake, not good. All right, mistake number two is the background. It's completely black. I lost the background image that I created. I think the curve editor was pushed too far, so it just pretty much made it straight black. Definitely don't want that. Mistake number three, the video that we put in the node editor is square. And I don't like it. I don't like the way it's sliding across the surface. Nothing about this do I like. So I'm going to apply that texture, or sorry, that node that we created, the movie clip. I'm going to get rid of it, and I'm actually going to apply this video clip as a texture on the face, directly on the face, so I can just avoid that mess altogether. Let's see, issue number, what is it, 4 or 5? I'm not even sure what we're on right now. I don't like the fact that it looks like the lights are doing okay with the sparks. Not as much as I would like to see them affect the environment. Some of them did really well when they were lighting it. Like you can see here, it really lightens up right when that spark hits. And same thing with this one over here. You can see it lights up, so that's good. I do think the fire needs to start sooner. And kind of like the camera's pulling through lots of fire. So I need to extend the fire sim. Maybe extend those boxes that the fire's on so the camera's going through them instead of just kind of looking like the fire's being dragged onto the face here. That doesn't look right. Or not really that good, at least. And I think that's pretty much it. So fixing those mistakes, and I will be happy with this as a final project. So let's go ahead and close out of here and start with a new, or let's go file, open recent, and it was time 8. Okay, and we're actually going to switch out of here, go back to 3D view, and go file, save as, and we're going to save this as time 9. The first thing that I'm going to want to do is fix the sliding textures on the gears. So let me go ahead and select layer 1. And come in here and try to select the gear. And I'm going to hit period in the numeric keypad to frame it. I'm also going to, if you go to view and choose view selected, it does the same thing as period on the numeric keypad. So anyway, what's going on is that we have sliding textures. So if I go to a texture, and you can see here texture 2, it's mapping to G2.002, which is this guy right here, and that's why it's sliding. Now I'm going to go to the material section real quick, and this says brass 1. And this says brass 2, okay? So they're two different materials. So let's go to the texture and change the coordinates to, it's supposed to be G16.001. All right? And now that texture is not going to slide anymore. And click this guy, and this one's still G2.002, G2.002. Now, this guy, if I go to the materials, it's also brass 1. That's going to be a problem, so I'm going to hit the plus sign and jump back over to textures and change it within here. So if I change this to G2.004, which is the object that it is, you can see here, G2.004. Now just to make sure that these two are completely different materials, or sorry, texture coordinates, they are. Good. Alright, so let's switch to this guy and go to the material option. Again, it's brass 1, so I'm going to hit the plus sign. Jump back over to the texture coordinates and choose, for this guy, it's G2.001. Let's go to the last guy here. Brass, plus sign, and change it to G2.003. Okay, and I think all these guys are good. G8, G8001, G8001, okay, G8002, 002, and G8004, 4. Perfect. So let's select this guy and jump over to the material, brass 1, let's hit the plus sign. Go back to here, and this is going to be G4. All right, again, plus sign. And this is going to be G2. And let's hit the plus sign again. Oops. Plus sign. Nope, sorry. This plus sign. And this one's going to be G2.005. There we go. So now they're all their own texture coordinates. There shouldn't be any sliding textures anymore on the gears. All right, so that's one thing knocked out. Let's go ahead and go to the node editor, clean that up. So let's jump over to here and do node editor. Now I want to get rid of the video file that we attached to the face of the object. Now you're not seeing the face nor the pocket watch because we need to re-render those out, but I don't need them to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. That makes sure nothing else in the stack is selected, and I'm going to hit, whoops, let's scoot back over. I'm going to hit B on the keyboard to drag select and delete X on the keyboard. I don't need this either, X, and let me drag this over to here. Alright, so this is the pocket watch, the face, they're being combined nicely. I also remember the curves here was too extreme, so let me pull this out. I want to see some of that red and blue in the shot. Okay, so that's looking good. I think that's pretty much it. Pull these out a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump back to 3D and choose File, Save. Now I want to put the texture on the face, so let's jump to the face layer, which I think was layer 3. Now I'm going to jump over to the render layers, make sure that face layer is selected, and make sure layer 3 here is selected. So when I test render this, oops, rendering, I'll be able to see it. Jump back to solid. Okay, so let's go to the textures palette, and you can see here, I'm probably going to hit, oops, let me select the face first. I was wondering, it wasn't supposed to be brass. Okay, so with the face selected, jump over to the texture. I'm going to pick an empty slot, click New. I'm going to minimize these. Already is an image in a movie, that's what we want, but I'm going to grab the image tab here, move it to the top, and I'm going to say Open. It's going to be the export folder, footage, open. Now you can see here I've got a lot of options, deinterlacing, field options, alpha level, all that stuff. But I'm going to change here the start time to 0. I can choose any start time I want, and I can even offset the animation. I can even have the animation loop. So let's say my animation was only 30 seconds long and I wanted to loop. Just click this, cycle. Cyclic, I think is actually, cyclic is the actual term. But anyway, moving forward. Let's go ahead and minimize this. We're going to jump over to mapping options, and I'm going to choose object, and I'm going to select the object. And let's go ahead and go into the rendering mode. And you can see here it looks like a bunch of little checkered boxes. Definitely don't want that. So I'm going to switch to, let's say, 0.02. Actually, let's do 0.04. 0.04. And that's better. You can see here's the box right now. It's still not small enough. So let's go 0.02. 0.02. I think that did it. Let's try 0.03. Where does that put the line? Yeah, it puts it right here. Not good. 0.02. Now I'm going to scrub the timeline just to see various different points. So here's the explosion, roughly center of the face. That's good for me. And we have the plane taking off. That's pretty good. And we have the cannon fodder. So all that's good. So let's go ahead and play a little bit with the influence. So let's add a little bit of emission because it's too dark. And I'm going to set it to 0.03. That's better. And you can see that these two materials are mixing, that one's just not overriding the other. Got some clouds going on. If you want to mix it more, just lower the color value. That's too much. Or you can play with the blend mode. So you can say, let's say, add. And I can probably turn off emit if I'm going to add. And you can see it changes the way they're interacting. But I think I liked having it on mix. And I'm going to turn off, or turn emit back on to give it a little bit more light. to see what's going on. Okay, so that's all working for me. Let me go ahead and go back to the solid vote mode and select all these elements. I'm going to go ahead and go File, Save. Okay, so there's a couple of, I think that was pretty much it actually. The face, the background, the sliding textures, oh, and the fire. So I wanted to fix the fire. Actually, first I want to create a light for my scene for the fire, because I want the fire to kind of illuminate the scene, but have a waveform to it that's kind of vibrating. So to do so, let's create a light, Shift A on the keyboard, and we're going to scroll down to Lamp, Point. Let me drag this way out here, drag it down near the camera. Okay, in fact, I'm going to put it below the camera, something like that. I think that's going to work. Yeah. Okay, so we have the light in the scene. Let's jump over to the properties. I'm going to go ahead and set this to constant, and let me just dial up the distance a lot. Let's say 200. That's still not far enough. Let's go 300. Too far. 250. That's probably not good enough. Actually, that is good enough. Okay. All right, so we have the distance set. That's not really that big of a deal, but the energy I want to set to, let's say 0.1. And I'm going to change this color to an orange red. Now I already did some test rendering with this. That's why I know where my energy needs to sit. Too bright and I get too much light being applied. I definitely want to turn on ray trace shadows. And I think that's pretty much it. Let me lower it just a little bit more. Okay, so that's looking good. Let's go ahead and File, save this. And let's create that automatic kind of flickering light effect that fire creates. So to do this, we're going to go into the graph editor with the light selected. In fact, actually, we're going to take our time slider back down to 0. And I'm going to roll over the energy, right click, and say Insert Keyframe. All right. Now, in the past, you would see people manually type in keyframes, and that's the way we used to have to do it. And it was very troublesome and long and tedious. Now, actually, all we need to do is go Key, add F-Curve Modifier, and we're going to choose Noise. And that's going to create an automatic noise pattern. So I'm going to open up the properties here, and I'm going to open this up a little bit so we can see these values. So Scale kind of scales out the noise value. So you can see here it's going to decrease how often it's going to flicker. So I'm going to bring that down because I definitely want it to flicker. And if I hit the play button, I mean, we're not going to visually see the render, but at least you can kind of see these values change. And that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. Yeah, okay. So let me go ahead and pause this. Now I have options of how much it's going to change. So the scale is the how many times it's going to change over time. The phase kind of even wobbles it a little bit more. It's not really, it just changes the wave form. And then you have strength. So that's how much it's going to change over time. So I don't want it changing too much. I don't need to get it too bright and then have way too much in the shot. So 0.5 is probably good. And I can actually offset it as well. I can add a little bit of depth to it to add a little more wave bounciness to it. And I'm not going to do that. I think this is fine. Scale down a little bit more. Maybe something like that. And I would love to be honest, my sincere, literal statement about this is to test render is go into your render settings and dimensions, set this to like 25% and render this out to see how the light looks. And that's probably actually what I'm going to do to really test it. In fact, let me just drop this down now to 14% is good. And let me make sure that the post-processing is rendering out compositing and sequencer. All right, so now that I have my light creating its automatic up and down scale over time, I'm going to go ahead and go to my 3D view, and I'm going to make sure my light is affecting all the layers. So I'm going to M on the keyboard and just hold down Shift and click through all these layers. All right, so that's good. I talked about how I changed the fire scene up, so let me jump over to the fire scene. And let me hit period on the keyboard to frame the little box here. Now to expand the fire effect, now just to give you a heads up, I'm not going to do this because my computer is at its limit. I tested this earlier and it just kept crashing. But yours might be a little bit more powerful to be able to handle more fire and more of a simulation. So there's many ways to do this, but one way is to take these objects, hit tab on the keyboard, go to face mode, and let's say grab these faces. Let me start from this one and go over. And move them this way. And do the same thing with this. Move them over. And that should be good. Then go ahead and hit out of edit mode. Select this guy, hit scale. Go on the y-axis. Scale it up a little bit more. And there you go. And of course make sure you go object, apply, scale. Okay. Now again, my computer's not going to handle this simulation, so I'm just going to go ahead and undo those two things. I'm going to go ahead and jump back to scene 1. Okay. So it looks like we're ready to do a test render. I'm going to set this at 25% just to get an overall feel. Again, I'm just trying to see how this is going to look. Maybe even drop it down to 15%. 1920 by 1080. We want to make sure our post-processing is compositing. And let me just check the node editor one more time. Node editor. Okay. And everything looks like it's pulling in correctly. Movie clip is pulling in correctly for the fire. So let's jump back to 3D. File, save. And let's render this out. But first I want to go into time, export, composite. I'm going to select all these frames, Control A on the keyboard for a PC. And I'm just going to hit delete. Delete them all. Wow, 2.79 gigs of images. How about that? Okay, so that's good. Now I'm just going to save one more time. Never hurts to save often. And this is all set. Shading, I don't need the motion blur applied. It's going to the composite. File extensions. RGBA. I'm just making sure everything's checked. So let's go ahead and click animation. So you can see how tiny it is, but it will take a lot less time to render than the 3 days that it took to render this before. So I'm going to go ahead and come back after it's done and we'll get this tutorial finished up. Blender finished rendering. So if I take a look at the folder, composite, you can see that it has all the images. And it looks like I spelled composite wrong. It has an E at the end, but I'm not going to adjust it now. Okay, so let's test this. Let's go ahead and go File, New. Actually, let's go File, Save first, then File, New. And let's jump over to Video Editing. Clean this up real quick. Oops, well, let me just change this view. Let's change this to Video Sequencer. Click this. Let's drag this over. Change this to Properties. Set the values 0 to 360. And 30 frames per second. We can grab this, slide it all the way up, change it to timeline, change this one to video sequencer. Okay, so let's go ahead and import the files. Let's go add, movie, export, composite. Oops, I need to add it as an image, sorry. Add image, composite. I'm going to go A on the keyboard to select all, add frames, and you can see it's been added. And I want to set it, let's go ahead and open this up to start at frame 0. And let's go ahead and hit play. Yeah, much better. Okay, and I guess my only gripe now really is the fire effect. I wish it would start maybe right around here to see the fire instead of right at the end. But the lighting being casted from the fire looks good. The textures no longer look like they're slipping. Let me zoom in here. Let me pause this. Okay. I know it's really low quality, but that's because we lowered it. And yep, none of the textures are slipping. Everything's following correctly. And we're getting the video. Boom. On the face of the clock. Looks good. Okay, so now that I know that everything's pretty much spot on, I'm still losing the background. Still a little too compressed, but not as bad as it was before. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Of course, I would jump back into the other file, open recent 9, and now that I know I'm happy with, oops, switch this to 3D view. Now that I know I'm happy with the final render, all I need to do is change this back to 100% and go ahead and delete everything out of this folder. Oops. Control A. Delete on the keyboard. In fact, let me just rename this now that I'm here. Come to here, composite, and rename this 3D composite. Accept. So I've set all my values up for the rendering output. Everything's correct, layers, etc., etc. Post-processing. All right, so we're actually good to go. Now you can do a final render on this and bring it back in, add your audio and all that stuff, or use the timeline that you created that already has the audio in it to finish this off. So now it's a complete project. So I'm going to go ahead and set it to render, and I'll come back and show you the final version that I have full resed, and that should be it for this tutorial series. This is the final render, so let me go ahead and hit play. And you can see here I fixed the textures sliding on the surfaces of the gears. We have now the plane flying through the air, and that's all sticking through. I'm getting no weird borders. Let me pause this before it ends and jumps out of frame. Let's see here. We have no weird borders on the actual playback in the video, and I think our particle systems are working well. Yeah. Now, last mention, this is very last mention. Remember when we broke apart our entire system? In fact, let me zoom out to where we have some particles. Okay. Particles and objects that have deflectors do not recognize each other when they're on different layers. I completely forgot to mention this earlier in the tutorial series, and I'm terribly sorry. So I'm mentioning it now. Deflectors won't work on these objects to deflect the particles. I just got lucky that the particles are positioned in a way that it's really catching the openings and going out. So it doesn't, you really can't tell them going through any of the objects. So just keep that in mind. If you want the objects to interact with the particle system, they have to be on the same layer. With the deflection that we've added. Is there anything else? Let's see here. Oh yeah, for export, I did go to Google to find out the best export settings for audio and video. So it really likes the H.264 codecs with an MP4 container. So I'm not sure we can pull that off in this, but let's take a look. So if I switch this to, let's say, MPEG, and it doesn't look like we have an option for, well, there's H.264 under MPEG. Oh wait, sorry, I need to go into coding. So MPEG, encoding, there's MPEG 4, H.264, that might be the same thing. Otherwise what you can do is just an H.264 and switch this in here to an H.264. Audio settings, it says that it prefers the AAC. So we can switch the audio format to AAC. And we can choose a bit rate of, it doesn't have a setting for bit rate. Frame rate, bit rate. I guess you have recommended bit rates for uploads. So if you're doing a 1080p at 8 megabytes per second, or a high frame rate of 12 megabytes per second, Let's jump back to Blender. So in the video section, bitrate right here, we're at 6,000 kilobytes. I think this is what this stands for. Yeah, 6,000 kilobytes. So you can bring this up to 8,000. That should be 8 megabytes. And then audio settings. I don't think it had one for audio. All right, if you're doing mono, 128, stereo, 384, or 512. And so let's go 512 just for the best audio quality. 384 it looks like is the highest coming out of Blender because we're not doing a stereo format. So everything else looks good. Of course, you can try playing with the settings here. Max, this is bits. What is this? Kilobytes. So I was right. If you roll over these, they tell you what they are. So that's pretty much it. If you have any other concerns or questions, just, I guess, on the YouTube channel, type in the bottom your questions or concerns. But otherwise, I think that covers this tutorial series. And I thank you for watching.